Hello and welcome to the latest episode of The Rewind, where we dive into the making and legacy of various films from cult classics to award-winning masterpieces. In today's film, Blind Fury 1990, Rutger Hauer, Philip Noyce is definitely cult classic material here. And to talk to me about it today, Lance Vlcek. He's a video editor, writer, narrator. You can see stuff over at joeblow.com. Especially check out the Joe Blow Originals Horror channel because Lance does a lot of work editing and narrating and doing a bunch of stuff there as well. And Lance, last time I had you with me, I don't know, maybe a few years ago, but we've always been in contact since
Yeah,
then.
yeah.
And it's so great to have you back on Matt's movie reviews airwaves again. How have you been?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Surviving, living life. Yeah, I think the last time we talked was around the time the Candyman remake came out, actually.
We were talking about horror films of the previous year and Candyman. I think it was we've talked about in January, February. So that was around the time that where Candyman came out. So that would have
Yeah.
been 2019, 2018,
Yeah,
something like
it's
that. I
been a
don't
while,
know.
but no, dude, it's
Yeah.
good. It's good to see you. And this is a such a wild movie to talk about too. I mean, I haven't thought about this in a little bit, so this was a good of it was good for me to kind of go back because it's like, oh man, Blind Fury. Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
okay, okay.
Well,
Oh,
the
good man.
reason
How
I
about
want
you?
to,
How's
well, I'm good. I'm good because I get to go back to these films and feel a little nostalgic, feel a little bit to get that creative juices flowing, talking about films I really admire. And this film is a film that I remember watching when I was a kid. I'm an 80s kid, VHS generation. The film came out in the US March 16, 1990. In Australia, we got a bit earlier. Philip Noyce, who's the director of the film, is an Australian director. So they kind of tested the waters here first in Australia before it premiered in Germany and later in the US, just to see if people liked it. And it was actually a big hit here, both theatrically and especially on VHS. Cable, we didn't get cable in Australia until years after Blind Fury. So this is a movie for me that brought back a lot of memories because I haven't seen it in a long time. But when I watched it, I immediately remembered, oh, I remember Britko says something here, or this thing happens here, or that thing happens there. I was kind of surprised how violent it was. I didn't remember being so violent when I was younger. Maybe my older brother kind of shielded me from all the violent stuff. But having said that, I actually had a lot of fun with this. Do you remember the first time you watched Blind Fury, Lance?
so here's the strange part about Blind Fury is that I remember it at the video store a lot. And we're
Hmm.
going to get into something very specific. So I didn't rent it as a little kid, like, when I was in, I call it grade school. So probably like 10, from like, let's say 8 to like 14 was like my peak video store era. I had no boundaries to get whatever I wanted. And I remember the cover. The issue is that the cover we had was the weird, goofy one where
Right.
it almost looks like a comedy. So I was like, I never
Hmm.
rented it because it's a comedy. High school, a buddy of mine talked about it. I was like, oh, is that like the comedy with Rutger Hauer? And it's like, it's kind of like a serious movie, more in line of like, I don't know, like more like Midnight Run or something where there's comedic elements, but it is a serious story. And so I was like, I guess so. When I watched it, I was like, oh, yeah, it's pretty damn good. So I made the mistake, and this is something that you'll learn about me more and more, is like I definitely used to judge a book by its cover. And the cover that I saw, and I still think it's the worst cover they ever did, was the cartoon version of him that looks like he's all a
Yeah.
wacky blind guy. I'm like, nah, man, that's not the movie. So that was my history. And then, like I said, high school on. It's something I once in a while revisit. I think Bunbury was going to do a review on it for Rutger Hauer's death, and then we ended up changing the film. But if, even he thought like, oh, that's a cool cult one to talk about.
It is an interesting film in that Rutger Hauer as an actor. I mean, I think a lot of people when they think back on his legacy and such, they think more maybe of the villainous performances. Blade Runner, of course, is the movie that really everyone talks about, but especially like in the 80s, Hitchhiker is another
Oh yeah,
one, Nighthawk's
yeah,
another
good.
one. But when it came to Rutger Hauer, the hero, more of his stuff is more kind of a cultish titles. Blind Fury, one of them, Lady Hawk, another one as well.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah.
I remember Lady Hawk, I think it was like 85, Richard Donner film. That's a fantastic one as well.
Yeah, it's with
Um,
what's his name? Oh my gosh, he's not from Chicago, but he did the famous um how am I forgetting his name? Matthew Broderick.
yes, Matthew Broderick,
Yeah.
yes. And Michelle Pfeiffer as well in that as
Yes.
well.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
That's a good film. I remember watching it a couple of years ago. I really liked it as well. The thing about this film that's also interesting is that when I was just looking at the production of it, it was actually it's officially a licensed remake of the Zatoichi film series, the Japanese film series of the Blind Samurai kind of thing. And the guy who got the rights for it is this actor named Tim Matheson. Tim Matheson, a lot of people know him from film stuff, from Animal House. It was like the main kind of like
Mhm.
jerk in that movie. But he's really kind of prolific as kind of like he's done some directing and producing, but as an actor in TV. He's now on Virgin River. He was on Evil not that long ago. I don't know if you've seen Evil, that was on Paramount Plus, was on that. He's been in heaps of stuff. So he gets the rights to it. He wants to make it. He doesn't want to star in it. And it takes some time to get kind of like, get it off the ground a bit. And then he thinks to himself, Rutger Hauer, kind of like like again, interesting kind of actor in that in his native, I think it's what Netherlands he comes from. He did films with Paul Verhoeven and stuff back then. More kind of like an artistic kind of crowd. But when he came to America post, Nighthawks and Blade Runner, more of a genre guy. So like a little bit of a switch there as well. What did you think of Rutger Hauer, kind of like the action star as opposed to kind of like the character guy we all kind of used to now when we look back at him?
So Rutger Hauer is a weird actor for me because as a kid, I he was the guy that always popped up, and he had a weird name. So I remember he wasn't a name that like to me was a very familiar name, but he was a familiar
Mm,
face. Uh, the thing about him is what I love is that he's super intense and everything. And
yeah,
even in this, it's like you picked a very interesting, like a total character actor to play what is a kind of a fun role. It's serious,
yeah,
of course, but the way he plays it is I think strange. And something about Rutger Hauer that I've always liked is that he seems super intense for all of his roles. So to me, there's I forget the action movie's name right now. I'm really bad at I'm getting worse at names as I get older. He has a trench coat. It's like super low sci-fi. It's real badass.
oh, Split Second.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. So it's like that's because I think either that was an Albert Pune or it's in that I put it in that sort of subgenre of like full moon and canon stuff.
yeah,
That
yeah,
of course, a big one, Lady Hawk, because Lady Hawk
yep,
to me was like the other Willow.
yeah.
He played the bad guy in the Stallone one. I can't think of what it's called, where Stallone has a dress at the end and turns around.
Nighthawks, yeah,
But hold on, I may be missing up. Nighthawks is that
yeah.
one. What's the fantasy one?
Lady Hawk's the fantasy
Well,
one.
okay, Nighthawk and Lady
Nighthawks
Hawk.
is the Stallone one. Yeah, so he's a little bit got a thing with birds, right?
Like that is good. That and then obviously the Hitcher, which fucking I think is my favorite role of his outside of Blade Runner. I actually think I prefer it over Blade Runner because I think he
Mm,
really gets to shine in terms of just emoting. But for me, I don't really put him as an action or like a drama guy. He's just the weird, intense actor. He's almost like Michael Shannon of the 80s. He just shows up in
yes,
stuff. Doesn't
yeah,
really fit. Like you can't, yeah, you put him, okay, put him as Zod, awesome. But then also, you know, put him as some kind of weird guitar playing guy in Mud.
mm,
He also, okay, put him in Bug. It's like, what is this guy doing? Like,
yeah,
he land? Rutger Hauer was like the European version of that to me. So it's like, I never put him in like a genre. He was just a weird dude that always showed up that I kind of appreciated as he hung around. He's the kind of guy that I think when he passed, I didn't realize how important he was to me. Honestly, I took him for granted. I was like, oh, actually was in a ton of
yeah.
stuff that I grew up with. But what
He's
about
one
you?
of those.
What?
I mean, he's one of those actors to me that, I mean, when we were growing up like in the 80s and watching movies in the 90s and stuff, there's specific actors that kind of pop up in these films like sometimes, and they can't be pigeonholed. They do some things. I think the most popular example of that would be like a Bill Paxton, for example.
Mm,
Before he did like Big Love and that kind of drama stuff, he was kind of like a genre guy. Just he was in Near Dark and he was in Aliens and he was in Predator 2 and he did this and did that kind of stuff, right?
put him in weird science as well, So it's like he's
Ex
everywhere.
exactly. And Rutger Hauer kind of reminds me of that kind of guy. He just shows up in different films like that. And then he kind of found his niche in the 90s. I think the 90s came, it was kind of like his kind of stuff that in the 80s couldn't translate that well into the new decade. I mean, a lot of action heroes couldn't really translate because it was more kind of like the Bruce Willis archetype, Nicolas Cage archetype they did in the 90s kind of action hero, Keanu Reeves as well. Rutger couldn't fit that. And he did more kind of the B grade stuff. And I was thinking to myself, and it's interesting you said Michael Shannon. Who is the equivalent of that now? Who is like that guy that does that? And I was thinking one of the names that came across in my head was Michael Shannon,
Yeah.
because he is that kind of guy that can kind of meld in different genre, but you know that if he's going to take on a role, he's going to be really committed and serious. And sometimes with his look and his mannerisms and the way he conducts himself, he's like the most memorable guy you might think of after the movie, even if he's not the leading man. I think that's something that Rutger did really well.
Exactly. He's the guy that in a bad movie, you'd be like, he's like, yeah, the movie I didn't care for, it's kind of lame. But the dude at the liquor store, he's the guy that shows up and just kind of steals it. Because again, I really boil down to some people have this intensity. They're
Mm,
just burning brighter than most, like they just fully in. And that's why I put Michael Shannon into that because I feel like you could put him in a comedy, he'd be good, but he has
yep,
the eyes. He has the serious eyes, but that also says that like you're an actor, a true actor. Rutger Hauer is an actor, man. I feel bad because I think a lot of his career they're trying to put him into a role because, as you said though, in the '80s especially, and I'd add the '90s into it, but I think the '90s were a little bit better. In the '80s, you had to fit a role. You if not a role, then you were a movie star. Okay,
mm,
so either you fit the role, you have to be in action, you have to be a baby face, you got to be this, or you got to be Michael Douglas. Okay,
mm,
then you are AKA Michael Douglas. But Rutger Hauer wasn't, he couldn't reach that level. So I felt like they try to make him a villain all the time because he looks kind of crazy. Then they try to, make him an action star where it's like, yeah, just let the guy work, just let him
yep,
do stuff. And I kind of think that this is kind of shows his range because it's a fun role for a serious movie, but he plays it. He
yep,
plays it very different than Rutger Hauer would if you had this directed by somebody else because he kind of is chill. He's very he's kind of goofy. He's having a good time, and it's like that's the opposite of what I would put Rutger Hauer in. So that to me is like okay, that's an actor.
yep,
But I think I'm talking circles. But in the end, I mean, I do think Michael Shannon would be our version only because not traditionally handsome, super intense. I think really owns every role they do, and also steals scenes without sort of overacting. Just has
yeah.
like a presence, and I think that's the thing about Rucker. And we never even talked about was it Flesh and Blood? Was that the Verhoeven, the weird sex one from
Oh,
before he
I
became
did.
in
Was it
America?
something about Turkey, something else? Turkish Delight. Was it Turkish Delight? Was that one of them as well? I think. I'm not
Yeah, I
100%
think
on
so. I
that.
think so because there's some weird ones that I got to kind of give another watch that I've only seen once. But I mean, this guy was all over the place, and that's kind of cool,
Yeah,
dude.
yeah.
Just everything and anything. How about the shotgun? He did
Yes.
he did a Toxic Avenger type of exploitation film. That one of his last ones.
And the interesting
So
thing, so this movie, just to go on, just dive into the plot, you got Rutger Hauer plays this guy named Nick Parker, Vietnam veteran. He was a prisoner of war, kind of. He was actually more kind of like left behind. And he was kind of like he's blinded during war. He gets kind of taken in by this village of Vietnamese people. And he's kind of taught how to perform the art of the sword by this guy in the village. Kind of seemed like more like a witch doctor or something in there. I wasn't sure
mhm.
exactly what his role is, but taught him. And then a decade later, he's in Miami. He's trying to find his mate, who was played by Terry O'Quinn, who's from The Stepfather. Later, a lot of people remember him from Lost as well.
Yeah,
Terry
John Locke.
O'Quinn, he's in deep to some really bad guys in I'm pretty sure they were in Nevada. I'm pretty sure
Yeah,
it's
it
set
should
in
Vegas. Yeah, they're in Vegas.
Vegas. And then they kidnap his son. Now the son is played by this actor named Brandon Cole, um, who I don't know if you remember your '90s sitcoms, was in the
Oh, I
sitcom
do.
Step by Step, the one
Step
with
by step.
Sasha Mitchell and what's Deborah, was it Deborah Summer who was in it as well? I think
Uh,
she
uh,
played
Summers. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Susan Summers.
Susan Summers. Yes, yes,
Susan
yes. And
Summers,
the
yes,
and the guy,
from
the
Dallas.
guy, and the dude, yeah, the guy from Dallas and the dude that lived in the van who was like the
That's
hippie
Sasha.
guy.
That's Sasha
Oh, is that
Mitchell. So
okay?
that's the one
Kickboxer
from
two and
Kickboxer
three.
2. That's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he was in that, in which also I found kind of interesting because at that time I remember watching Kickboxer 2 and I was like, oh, that's Sasha Mitchell. And Sasha Mitchell's it's like a bit of a this is my first kind of time I ever did the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon without knowing what 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon is.
That's
And
Cody
so
from Step by Step. Yeah,
Cody, that's right, that's his name.
yeah.
So Rutger's character of Nick Parker, he has to save Billy from the clutches of these bad guys. And the way that he does so is really interesting because when watching it again recently, you have kind of like the action scenes, the whole samurai thing, but there's a bit of slapstick kind of thrown in there as well, which I found kind of really interesting. Because the character being blind, he finds himself in situations where a lot of guys want to take advantage of him because of his disability. And he's like, okay, I'm going to have a little fun with this. And he'll like accidentally knock into someone, back someone up the other way, headbutt one guy, hit someone with his cane. Cool cane, by the way, kind of opens up. It's like a samurai sword, and
Wow.
it's fantastic. And I thought that was pretty cool as well because Rutger is not really known for his comedy, but this, while I wouldn't call it necessarily a buddy comedy, does have comedic elements in it, especially in a way that he kind of messes around with kind of like and dispatches with all these different guys that try to take advantage of not only his disability but his good nature as well.
He does like there's more physical comedy there. I remember the tone of this movie is it's I don't know if it works all the time, but I appreciate the strangeness of it because
Mm.
here's what I think. Okay, so because put him in the Mexican restaurant, and there's a scene where these guys are like dumping hot sauce on his food and just really messing with him. And for him to fend off, he pretends that he doesn't know it. It's very drunken master. Like,
Mm.
oops, accidental fist, accidental trip, accidental cane. Like he does that whole physical nature of like, oh, I'm just a blind guy, right? So we have fun stuff like that, but then cricket cops come and shoot Meg Foster to death and try to steal a kid. And then it's
That was
super
a
serious.
brutal scene. It's like just like shotgun. She gets flying across the room, and then he cuts off the guy's hand. It's like, holy shit! What movie am I
Yeah,
watching now? Yeah,
exactly. But 10 minutes ago, it was like, whoops, cane to the face. So I think the movie definitely jumps around in tone. So it's weird, but I
yeah,
kind of like it because it's a comedic movie at times, and then it's super serious, and it kind of goes back and forth because the subplot of them trying to get Billy and Rucker Hauer protecting Billy is super serious. It's played razor straight,
yep,
but it's like Rucker Hauer's Nick Parker, right? He
yep,
gets into like silly situations because he's essentially a ninja, but he holds himself as just this kind of this blind middle-aged man who doesn't want any trouble. So he acts in a way that sort of lends itself to the comedic elements, and it's strange. It works sometimes, doesn't always, but I like it because you wouldn't get this movie made today. They'd either make it super serious or, hey, we're not cutting off a guy's hand and shooting Meg Foster across the room. Pick one, you know?
exactly. You had to pick a lane, and this one does go through different lanes. The Matt's Movie Reviews YouTube channel is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you'll love. Maybe it has to do with director. So it's directed by Philip Noyce. So this was his kind of like big Hollywood US debut. So he was pretty popular in Australia, did a movie called Newsfront, and then he did a couple others. Then he did Dead Calm, which was with Billy Zane and Nicole
Yes,
Kidman.
okay, that's what I was looking for. Great movie too. Great movie with a Kiwi actor.
Sam Neill.
Yes,
Sam
Sam
Neill as
Neill.
well. And that's a great film. But what happens is he does that film and they're doing editing. And the studio who's working with producers that's working with Philip Noyce say, look, we need to change the ending. We need to like do, film a new thing, but we can't get Billy Zane until later in the year. He's like, okay, well, I'm gonna go to the US and film this other movie, and then when I come back, I'll reshoot the ending for Dead Calm. So the ending you see in Dead Calm now is like a reshoot kind of deal. Um, and Philip Noyce is interested in that. He's a director that has these really, really highs in especially during the 90s in Hollywood. He did the best two Jack Ryan movies, in my opinion, in Patriot Games and Clear and Present Danger.
I didn't know
But
this
then
guy. Yeah, this guy basically made
yeah,
Jack Ryan. He basically
ex
made the Jack Ryan that we grew up with. Is this guy's baby?
exactly.
I had no idea.
Exactly. But then he does all these other little films in between there that don't really go the way you expect it to go. And after doing Salt with Angelina Jolie later on, I think like a late, I think 2010 he did that. He comes back to Australia. He's been doing some films in Australia since then. Um, he has a funny quote that I read where he described the movie as an Australian directing a samurai movie in Texas with a Dutch lead actor, which kind of again comes to I mean, everyone talks about diversity. I mean, that's pretty diverse if it comes down to it, right? I mean, that's kind of
Quite.
how it
Yeah.
goes. But him as a director, I mean, he's one of those guys where you've seen his stuff, but you don't know you've seen his stuff. There's some directors like that, right? But it doesn't have kind of like
100%.
the maybe outside of Australia, doesn't have the pedigree of say, I don't know, Peter Weir, for example, or something like that, because he like the award stuff doesn't really come with it. He didn't really do a drama. He did in Australia, but not in US. When you look into Philip Noyce's career, and you were saying before, he was the guy that pretty much made Jack Ryan,
Yeah.
who we used to a lot of people, the Harrison Ford ones. What do you think of his kind of career overall and the way that he approached this movie? Do you reckon that it kind of benefits from having an outsider kind to approach this kind of material? Because to me, if it was done by a stock guy like, I don't know, the bloke who did Cobra or something like that, maybe we would have had that
Oh,
really, really serious film, and maybe him being an Aussie and, a Dutch lead actor, a blonde Dutch guy playing this samurai ninja kind of guy, maybe that is to the benefit of the movie. And if it was just a straightforward kind of like 80s action, that we wouldn't have remembered it or have the cult status that we have today.
yeah, I mean, I think being an Aussie, you guys have a certain playfulness and sense of humor. I mean, as an American, I fear your country. I think everything's trying to kill you. And every time I've ever met an Aussie, they're happy, go lucky. I mean, just like the party people, man. You guys are just really chill. So I think there's an element of that because I was looking at this guy's IMDb because I got to be honest, name wise,
Hmm.
Philip Noyce. I'm like, I don't know who this is. And he must have done nothing. And then I looked at his IMDb and they're like, oh my God. So
Yeah.
Dead Calm, that's a cult classic, but that is one that I think has grown over the years and got more of a full, sense of America, Europe. I mean, we all know about it, but when I was a kid, like, most people didn't talk about it. But Patriot Games, right? Clear and Present
Mhm.
Danger, The Saint. I'm talking. So he was doing like it was at 98, 99, Elizabeth Shue, Val Kilmer. Though I wasn't a giant fan, like The Bone Collector, Denzel Washington.
Hmm.
What's her face? You just said in Salt.
Angelina Jolie.
Jolie. So it's like that's that's not a small director. This guy is big. He's worked
Yeah.
with big folks, major actors. So that's like a big. That's not a career to even shy away from. I think by looking at his IMDb, his filmography, I can't place this guy. I have no idea because it seems like he jumps over the place. Action, drama, thriller. And then this to me is a comedy. It's a comedy that gets super dark. But in the 80s, I know this is technically 1990 because it came out, I think, in Australia in 89. Uh, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Like the tone of this is something that doesn't exist, so it's hard for me to kind of place. I really don't know. I'm just, I mean, I'm kind of talking, pardon my French, with my ass here. I assume the tone here is because he's an Aussie and he's having fun. I think he probably could have made this a straight up thriller or maybe taken it a little more serious, but I think honestly, it works better being strangely comedic because it kind of gives, like I said, the midnight run vibe, or maybe even like a dark, like 48 hours at times is super
Hmm.
comedic, but like it's super dark and mean. So this just was the thing back in the day. So I think it helps, man. I mean, honestly, I prefer directors that jump around. I like the idea that the guy could do Clear in Person Danger and The Saint and also do Blind Fury. To me, I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, cool. But then Dead Calm is like a super intense thriller. So it's like, okay, hey, man, I don't know. I like him. I actually respect Mr. Noyce a lot more looking at his filmography. And it's like, okay, I got to give the guy, I think, some credit because I didn't realize he was out there kicking a bunch of ass for like the 80s and the 90s.
You know what Blind Fury kind of reminds me of? We were talking about it before, like 89, 90, what have you, when it came out. I don't know if you're like, I'm a big hard rock kind of metal guy. I'm like, I love that kind of stuff. And
Nah,
so,
I'm an old soul guy, dude. I'm like Otis Redding, but I know rock
so
though. So let's see.
if you look at the decade of the 80s was very much glam rock kind of thing, really big kind of stuff. That's kind of like Hollywood was at the time, big kind of action spectacles, kind
Yeah,
of like Rambo, Stallones and that. But when the glam rock thing kind of went into the 90s, it got swallowed up by the whole grunge thing. Everything became really kind of serious and all that.
right.
But at the tail end of the decade, the 80s going into the 90s, there are some bangers that are there, maybe even from like big bands that people don't know of because it probably didn't sell that well because the times were changing. People weren't buying that kind of music anymore. Blind Fury kind of reminds me of that. If Blind Fury was released, say, 2 years earlier, say 87, 86, I think maybe the appetite for that type of film would have been bigger because that was peak kind of Lethal Weapon, um, you know,
Yes.
48 hours. You mentioned before. What was the movie you were saying before? You said Leave Work in 48 Hours. Midnight Run was 88.
Midnight Run.
I think it was going for a buddy comedy to buy, but going into the 90s, maybe it was also try to catch up with the kind of like the Van Damme, Steven Seagal sensibility of stuff, which made things a little more serious and just really kind of like I want to, yeah, maybe for Seagal, you might say grittier with like above the law and such. But I think they was trying to straddle both sides of it going into a new decade. And by all accounts, the confusion that we have here, TriStar, who was the producer of the studio who did it there, had exactly the same kind of problems with it. Because while they watched the film, they were like, it's okay, but we don't know exactly what film this is and what we're trying to market it as. And it comes back to the video cover. Your video cover that you saw was the cartoon one which got the thing. The video cover that I saw here in Australia, which is where it did pretty well, was Rutger Hauer just looking at the camera and with a sword, kind of like this kind of thing, with a
The
city
cool
landscape
looking.
in the background. The cool looking
Yeah.
one. That's the one that I saw. And again, it came down to the marketing. And I think at the end they were going for more kind of like silly Dutch guy with a sword kind of thing, which maybe people saw, oh, don't worry, not really interested in that. Because in the US it did nothing at all until it went to like cable and home video. But in Australia, where it was released early, and supposedly in Germany, like where they released it like in like 89, like it actually did pretty well over there. Because him being a European actor, maybe there was more of a sensibility for, Rutger Hauer as a leading man. But again, it comes back to kind of a confusion about it. But then again, the confusion is what makes it beloved and classic, right? And that kind of
Yeah.
gives it a bit of a culty kind of status to it. But if you were going to take it one way, just say you had the decision and you could have made it work either you as a straight ahead actioner or more of a comedic vehicle, which one would have actually benefited better for it? I myself think maybe the actioner, but then again, I don't think maybe at that time that was something that people were looking for at that time because everything was transitioning.
Yeah. No, you want to make a great point about how this was a little too late. It's like kind of slashers. By the time
Mm,
um I'm trying to think what's it called. Dr. Giggles came out. It was like early
right.
90s. Like that whole it was just dead on arrival because it's like, dude, we're done
Yeah.
with this. This the problem is you can't put action or comedy. I would have sold this as like more of an
Mm,
adventure film that has comedic elements. Like, okay, Rucker Hauer's samurai has to protect this kid as he goes, from Florida to Reno or whatever, and fighting off bad guys along the way. Though going more serious probably would have helped because between the comedic elements, it's every time he faces a bad guy, it's serious. Outside of the guys at the Mexican restaurant, every time he actually has to fight, like in the cornfield. The cornfield's a pretty like there's
it's a great
comedic little
scene.
parts, but it's like it's intense. You got
Mm.
what's his name? Oh my gosh, Texas Randall Tex Cobb or Randall Cobb. I think is the
The big
guy
guy with
from
the cigar. Yeah, I
yeah,
think it
like
was in
he's intense,
yeah,
you know. He's like he's
mm,
sitting on the roof trying to perch him off with the shotgun. So
yeah,
I feel like you should have sold it as an action-y adventure movie
yeah,
because then the comedic elements wouldn't have come off so weird. But in the end, you're right though. This movie was just made too late
yeah,
because what it was going for had been done so many times and the tastes are changing. Like you said with metal, it's like Vince Neil said famously, like, I just want to party and like sleep with chicks. And then like
yeah.
1990 comes around and then, Kurt Cobain is smashing his guitar and fucking wearing flannel. It's like nobody wanted to listen to us. So it
Hmm.
is a thing. I mean, it sucks, but in the end, we get a cult classic. And, I feel like you can never plan when things are going to hit anyway. So as long as you have a legacy, I think your movie wins in the end. I just feel bad because I think Rucker Hauer outside of Blade Runner, I feel like almost every film he did was one of those like years later, people are like it's awesome, but
Yeah,
never really popped on arrival. I mean, there might be two or three maybe, but I'm saying that his career, I think, is like everything always eventually got its comeuppance,
yeah.
and this is one of them.
He's like a legacy actor, right? Like some guys have a
Yes.
body of work that people look back on, and he's definitely one of those guys. I think there's a documentary, in fact, coming out later this year. I think it's called Tears in the Rain, and it's a documentary about Rutger Hauer's life in film. And I think it's doing a festival run soon, maybe over in Europe and such. But it's definitely, I mean, I saw the trailer for it like last week, and it looks great. And he kind of reminded, oh yeah, he was in that film and that film, and
Yeah,
he
it's
was
in
also in
everything,
there as
right?
well. He was just one of those guys. Well, according to him, though, I found a quote on his website. He was talking about how this was actually the hardest film he ever did because it wasn't only the sword play, which is in itself, you had to train and such, but you the actor the whole part of trying to act blind in a movie as well made it very difficult as well for him because he wanted to pull it off, him being such an intense actor. He wanted to pull it off. And so he had to learn a new skill, but then had to also replicate this skill set while pretending not to be able to see anything. So it was something that was very difficult for him. However, he actually had help. He was doing interviewing people at the Los Angeles Braille Institute and met this guy named Lynn Manning. Now, Lynn Manning um, was a bloke at the time at 34, um, went blind in a bar fight, funny enough. Well, I'm not sure to say funny enough, but it's kind of coincidental him, with this movie, so many bar fights. I went blind in the bar fight. But he, instead of kind of like wallowing in this thing that happened to him, he actually learned how to do judo. And he got like at the 1988 US Paralympics, got what's it called? Played actually was in the US Olympics. He got a brown belt. He was in the Olympics. He did all that stuff. And so Rutger Hauer actually finds a blind martial artist. And he pretty much taught him all the different stuff he needs to know about martial arts. The sword play was something totally different. There was a guy named, sorry, I'm just going to look here, Sho Kusugi was brought in for the sword play. So yeah, so he finds someone who actually helps him with that. But I don't know about you. I think a biopic about this Lynn Manning guy would be incredible to watch because he's this guy who gets plain in a bar fight and then he ends up, becoming an Olympian and a brown belt in judo and training Rutger Hauer in a movie in a movie. I think that's an incredible story that I'd love to see
It's
brought to
it's an
life.
Oscar. It's literally an Oscar story. Like a
Yeah,
guy, overcomes adversity, trains, hits the highest level you can, being in the Olympics, and then also becomes like a trainer to like a big Hollywood star. Yeah, dude, hell yeah, hell yeah. I heard, I did, I and Rutger Hauer does pretty good. I this last rewatch, I kept looking to see if he'd flinch and stuff like that.
mm,
Just like I knew it wouldn't be big, but seeing if he had any sort of like unconscious reactions to like people throwing stuff or doing stuff, and like he didn't. Like again, maybe there's a small thing that I missed, but I kept looking for him to kind of blink or flinch when he couldn't have known something was there, and I was like, okay, that's how you know Rucker Hauer's like I don't want to say method per se, but like an intense actor. Because I
yeah.
feel like that stuff you can't control. Yeah, it's like when you shoot guns, you flinch. I don't care how as much as you train. Uh, Without a lot of training, your body naturally freaks out to a loud sound. So I was like, okay, good for you, Howard. Good for you.
When it comes to this film, it doesn't do well, even though supposedly the film kind of leaves itself open to a sequel. And Tim Matheson was talking about how, there was, ideas for a sequel there, but I just don't think that it had enough juice going for it to have a sequel greenlit. But if you're going to do Blind Fury like today, do you think Blind Fury will work as a movie now, or can you see it being something of a, I don't know, like a kung fu kind of series thing, where when you were saying before, like the adventures of this blind Vietnam veteran going through, America. I reckon that will be a really cool, you know, series to watch. Maybe give it a little bit of a, well, I wouldn't say give it a Cobra Kai tree because then you have to give it a little bit of a legacy play, and that wouldn't work with this one. But if you're going to reboot it, I think a TV series would be pretty cool. Exactly who will play the role, I don't know, and exactly if people would have the appetite these days to have a blonde Dutchman play a blind samurai. I'm not sure as well. Even though right
Yeah,
now we have Daredevil, so that's kind of like almost in the same ballpark. He's a blind ninja in the superhero costume. But I think it could be. I think there's still potential here for this to be something pretty cool for like a new generation and a new kind of time.
I think TV is the way to go for a lot of things, just because you get so much more character development, long arcs, and just it's listen, it's a great medium to tell stories in. The only argument I guess I'd have is I feel that this would have worked better in like the late 90s, early 2000s when procedurals
Hmm.
had more of a hold because you want him to have a different adventure. Because the only thing is, if we did it now, we'd have to have a season arc or a giant
Mm,
arc, like everything is serialized. So that'd be the only thing. And then, as you made a good point, though, Daredevil is essentially this, just more serious. But yeah, I mean, I just feel things like this work better with television. I just do, dude. I love television. I think dramatic television is amazing. Um, that I like it to keep a sort of fun tone. So I don't know where it would fit. I mean, I guess at Cobra Kai. I think Cobra Kai take that tone, but give it a little more grit. I think that's what I would
mm,
want for this. Cobra
yeah,
Kai it's very fun and it's good and all, but I'm saying that this does have people getting their hands cut off, Nick Foster getting shot, Terry Quinn's being held over the edge. There's murders. I mean,
yes,
Rutger Hauer definitely slices the hell out of people. So that
yes.
that would be my thing. It's like, okay, let's make it a television show, but like we got to find a little more balance to the tone. So I'm trying to think what show now has that fun tone that is also kind of serious.
Reacher,
Uh, what's it called?
Jack Reacher.
Yeah, dude, we just got it sold.
Yeah,
Exactly. You root behind who's kicking ass. You love him, but it has a little more of Reacher.
yeah.
Yeah, look what you're doing, buddy. Yeah, dude.
That's the elevator pitch. They say, "What you got?" Okay, a blind samurai Jack Reacher, and they'll go,
I want to
"Sold."
see it.
Yeah,
Get Anthony Michael Hall back as a bad guy. Come on, dude. There's all sorts of stuff we can do it. Yeah, and perfect. Perfect. Yeah. Okay. I stand corrected. I think you just sold me the show.
the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video, one of the best on-demand streaming services available. Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere. It could be cool because this is a movie. When I watch it, I had fun with it. I felt really nostalgic. I had a lot of nostalgia for it. I remember a lot of the scenes when watching it again. But to me, it was a film that also I think just had a few tweaks shy of becoming like it's a cult classic, but I mean like a real kind of staple of maybe action comedy, cinema of that time. I wouldn't put that in that tier of the Lethal Weapons or the Midnight Run to stuff like that. If you were going to do a tier,
No,
if I was going to do A, B, C, I'd probably put this in a high C, maybe low B kind of thing like that as well. Fun,
completely
but
agree.
not necessarily a kind of like a staple of what it's trying to make. Interestingly enough, the fight at the end between Rutger Hauer's a character and the other samurai guy, the Japanese samurai guy, that was actually a reshoot. That wasn't originally part of the movie. The TriStar saw it and said, you got to have another guy in there somewhere. You got to have like another samurai and have a big kind of fight scene in there. And that bloke who was the um the samurai. I was trying to find his name here. Sho Kasugi. Okay, so that's the guy that taught Rutger Hauer how to do the sword fighting in the film.
Oh,
He
that's
was
his
actually
trainer.
in a ton of those. A lot of those kind of like ninja films that came out in the 80s. So it's kind of like a staple in those kind of films. So like, your what was that one film? You had Ninja, you had American Ninja, like all that kind of like he was in like those
Yeah,
kind of
the
films. It
big
was like that
ninja
kind of
boom
guy.
of the 80s and 90s. I loved it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone wanted to be a ninja. And that was another thing that I found really interesting about this movie as well, is that in the 80s, swords were a big thing.
Yeah.
And I don't mean just like in movies, He-Man sword, Thundercats, Ninja sword, Ninja Turtles swords, lightsabers, all that kind of thing. Swords was a big thing. Because you still had your sword and sandal stuff, you had your fantasy stuff, you had your ninja stuff and everything else. And I don't know about you, I think it's time to make swords great again. I think we need to bring swords back, um, and make it a thing because there's a new He-Man movie coming out. I know that the Master Universe
Yeah.
film's coming out, so that's going to be, and I know Thundercats Forever has been kind of like in that stuff, but I think it's time to bring the swords back again in movies because we haven't really seen a really good where a sword is identified. It's almost kind of like it's not as a prop, but identified as as part of the character. And his sword's great because, of course, they're taking it from the Zatoichi kind of Japanese series with the cane, and then there's a blade underneath, kind of like that. But I don't really think I haven't seen, at least in a long time, maybe except for The Witcher, where a sword is part and parcel of a character as a whole. And I love to see that again in movies because I think they're awesome.
Dude, yeah, you're make a good point again. Like swordplay was such an 80s into 90s. I mean, it was a holdover from the 80s, and that's why it was big in the 90s. But I mean,
Mm.
that whole culture is gone. Like
Yeah.
I've never really thought about that, but in the last 20 years, I mean, it's almost non-existent. I
Maybe
mean, you
Kill Bill, I
think,
think is probably the only thing really.
yeah, but Kill Bill again was now harking back to the like I said, samurai and
Yeah.
ninja stuff. So it's like I think really we need to bring ninjas and that sort of thing back, and I think the sword comes with it. I think then we get into it because I'm trying to think what other like subgenre makes a sword such a prominent figure, you know?
Fantasy films, I think, are really cool because in the 80s, there were these kind of subgenre of these kind of trashy sword and sandal films like what's the one? Was it Death Striker or I forgot what it's called. Anyway, there was a whole bunch of these different things. I remember there was one with Patrick Swayze as well, Steel Dawn. He had an awesome sword in that. That was like a C grade, B grade kind of movie. Um, there's a whole
Still
bunch of
done.
these kind of films that in that time, kind of like trashy kind of stuff. But the sword was always a part of it. And whenever you had the cover of the VHS, I remember always seeing it. I'm always like, what does the sword look like? What does the sword do? Because different
Highlander.
swords do different things. Highlander, thank you. And now Highlander's coming back as well with Henry Cavill. So yeah,
Yeah,
swords.
yeah.
It's when this is the time. Swords are going to be great again. I think we need to have more swords in it as
If
well.
if Highlander does well, I think we'll be back. But I would like to bring back the ninja samurai. I'd like to bring back that aspect. I just think that's so
Mm,
cool. I don't know if it can because you know, in all honesty, this movie reminded me how just old things are because you know it opens up. He's in Vietnam. It's from the Vietnam
mm,
War, and obviously ninjas and that kind of stuff is so big now. So part of me is always scared because I'm like, yeah, I love that because that was kind of just what was around us growing up. And as much as I think we should bring it into this new generation, I also worry it's like, but what if this generation just doesn't care because it's
mm,
not a part of their existence? You know, it's like fuck. Like, so I
yeah,
don't know. I'd like to try. I think Highlander has a good shot of doing something, of moving the needle. But yeah, yeah, man. Even back in the day, just normal action movies, like some henchmen have swords. There'd be you
yeah,
get to like level 3 henchman, he pulls out a sword. It's like, can we just have henchmen again? Okay, well,
yeah,
bring back the henchmen, bring back the tiered henchmen, and then we get
yeah,
the sword. We gotta have like somebody to aspire to beat eventually. I think that's gonna help
yes.
us. But yeah, I'm kind of bummed out now. Like, oh man, Matt, it's like, yeah, you're right. No, there's no swords anymore. Maybe that's
We
why
gotta
things are
we gotta
sad.
work together and pitch this somewhere, dude. We gotta bring it back. We gotta say to him, it's like, what's your pitch? You go, it's a blind samurai Jack Reacher, and you say, and he's got a kick-ass sword.
Yeah. And he always
And
has a
it
sword, never loses it.
always has a sword. He never he's without. He's always like, don't leave home without. It's like his MasterCard. It's like,
Yeah.
it's
Like in his hat, even if it gets removed, he goes back for it. You
he
know, the
does. He
sword's a part
loses
of
the
him.
sword in the thing. He's like,
And he goes
he's
back.
a he's fucking blind. He's driving the car. He's like, okay, we got to go back. Speaking of which,
Yeah.
Scent of a Woman comes out in 1992. I was thinking about this when I was watching the film, Blind Fury, and there's an infamous scene in Scent of a Woman where Al Pacino is driving the Ferrari through New York City,
Yeah.
and he's blind. Blind Fury beat this by like 3 years. He's in the van. He's driving blind throughout Las Vegas. He beat it by like 3 years. I think Al Pacino needs to give. I hope Al Pacino sent Rutger Hauer a thank you note in regards to
Yeah.
that because
Appreciate you. That's a good point. Yeah. It was a good little chase scene too.
mm,
Him going back for the sword. I kind of thought it was smart. I mean, obviously it's clunky, but at least they set it up and like, okay, count one, two, you know, so it's like, okay, he's doing it by,
yes,
he's driving, he's doing everything by like feeling, oh, that was fun. That those are the comedic moments. You know, those are the moments
yeah,
around, you know, people getting their hands cut off and murdered, and you know, we never mentioned that at the very end. I mean, maybe I missed it as a kid, but like I didn't, you know, I love the fact at the end you find out that Terry O'Quinn is making meth.
yes.
The big
He's
thing is
he's the
he's Walter
he,
White.
without, but it's interesting about that scene. There's two things here I want to bring up now because he just triggered my mind. Number one, he's making this stuff. He's not wearing any type of. He's in his enclosed room. He's not wearing anything at all, like nothing at all.
No, he's just hanging
No
out. Yeah.
protective gear, no nothing, like how to do in Breaking Bad. And number two, saying before, Scent of a Woman kind of ripped off this film with Phantom Menace. Okay.
Okay.
Darth Maul gets cut, the
Oh,
side,
yeah.
falls off the thing, splits in half and going down. At the end of this movie, when Rutger Hauer is going up against the big what's the guy's name? The big Texan guy. You had his name before.
Tex Cobb, Randall Tex Cobb.
What does he do? Cuts him, pushes him out the window, and as he's falling down, what happens?
Say,
Slices him
yeah.
in
And
half.
it's this kind of almost a very similar looking effect. I mean, well, the effect is a
Mm,
lot worse in this one, but it
yeah,
has that same thing where it's like, it's wind, they're flapping, then it kind of falls
yeah.
apart. As a kid, I remember that looking bad. I think that was one of those like weird things where I was like, "Ooh, that was we ran out of money by that point, done, guys." But it's still a cool idea. And honestly, as much as it sounds like I'm harking on, it's like I don't give a shit. It's like, okay, that's fine, man. Bad effect. At least it was they made it kind of because there was I think some either some blood or some guts.
Yeah, you
I
definitely
like
see some stuff. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, and I was
you
like,
do.
okay, I like that. I like that. That's a good example of like you could have kept that bloodless and been fine, but I like the fact that they had some stuff in.
I think those again came back to the reshoots. A lot of reshoots that came at the end. Maybe they had like a little bit of money left for a few more action
Yeah.
scenes to go in there. But look,
Yeah.
overall, when I think back, when I watch Blind Fury and I think back of it, it's a film that I had fun with when I was a kid because it was just like I wasn't really exposed to kind of Japanese cinema, so this kind of the notion of a blind swordsman was new to me in regards, and this is how I kind of came across it. And watching it
Hmm.
again, I'm kind of just reminded about, just how cool the film was. Like I said, not the type of film that you'll put up in echelons along with other kind of buddy comedy or kind of action films of the late 80s, mid to late 80s. But that one where it's kind of like one of that kind of cult bangers that kind of slipped underneath the radar, and a lot of people found it again afterwards. And I really hope that people maybe can try to. I mean, right now it's only available. You have to purchase like or rent it from Amazon or something. But this is the type of film that I think if it went on streaming, if it hit like a Netflix or something like that, that I think some people might want to see it and like look back on it and might think it's pretty. It could go one or two ways. Either it's pretty cool or it's pretty lame. But overall, I think it's pretty cool because Brooker, I think,
Too.
brings something to it that another actor wouldn't be able to at that time. I think anyway.
We don't make movies like this. Here's the thing.
Yeah.
Think about this. You said high C, low B, and I actually completely agree in terms of where that would fit. But in that structure, this is unique. It's fun. It's all pretty well acted. Cool bad guys, henchmen. I can name. So can you at least two or three set pieces that are unique and interesting, right?
Hmm.
We don't make high C, low B movies like this anymore. We essentially
Right.
either make a really good movie or we fumble it and screw it up. Like I just don't think there's a lot of room. This is the mid-budget movie that doesn't exist anymore.
Mm.
And so for the rest of my existence, I will always hold this up. Like yes, in the echelon of like some great movies, I'm not going to put this up there. But as a B movie, this B movie is better than most movies now because I just think we are in a more creative era. There's more money towards little niche projects like this. So it's like we
Yeah.
either now get 3 million or you got to work with two. Whereas I didn't look at the budget, but I'm guessing this is probably like, I don't know, 15, 20 or something,
I
especially
think
in
it was
the
something
80s
like
and
feels something
90s.
like 18 or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so 18 now would probably be like 40 or something, right? So
Mm.
it's like, okay. I just think the middle budget movie, man, that's just there's something about that I really am drawn to, and this is a great example of it. It's not going to blow you away. It's not changing the world, but we're not going to see anything like this now. And
Yeah.
so by that, admission, this is better than most.
Yeah. And I think for Rutger Hauer is that while he didn't reach the heights of like some of his contemporaries in that decade, he's one of those guys like we were saying at the start, he was just this consistent actor that was always there. And when you knew he was there, no matter the budget or quality of the filmmaking, you know that his performance was going to be good. Um, and I can't like outside of like we were talking about Michael Shannon, there's like that type of actor. Like I kind of equate it in the sort of way to kind of like they're different because it's they do different types of movies as such. But Scott Adkins, I think to me, is kind of like someone who's kind of like that now. Like I know that Scott Adkins doesn't appear in the best films, but I know that when he's in, I can be guaranteed I'm going to see some really good martial arts, athleticism, hard hitting kind of stuff, because that's his niche, and he does it well. And Rutger Hauer wasn't a guy who necessarily had a niche, but whatever he was doing, he did it well. And I think this role here, Blind Fury, which by far I think was probably, I know Blade Runner is like the movie a lot of people know him for, but when it comes to him being the leading man in the film, this is by far is like for sure the biggest thing that he did in his career in Hollywood, because he's front and center of this action
Yeah.
comedy. He's out there, he's on the cover, no matter which cover it is, and he's doing his thing, and yeah, he's doing it as convincingly as he can, and I have lots of affection. I think affection is the right word I have for this film. And yeah, to me it's really fun. And yeah, and again, I got to go back to that Philip Noyce quote: "An Australian directing a samurai movie in Texas with a Dutch lead actor." It's a great quote. And for everyone these days who loves diversity, you got that right there, I think. Anyway,
We don't make them like this anymore, my friend. We
no,
just
sir,
don't.
we do
We
not.
just don't.
Well, Lance, I thank you so very much for your time today. For everyone listening, in the show notes, I'm going to have links to Lance's work over at Joe Blow Horror Originals and his other stuff as well. Please be sure to go over and check it out. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to talk to you again today, and a pleasure to talk about this film, because it was a good throwback for me. I love talking about my thing now with my work. I've stopped looking at new stuff. I'm just looking at classics and cult stuff, and this is one of those films to me, kind of really brought me back to, like, 11, 12-year-old, Maddie, just trying to get in as much gratuitous violence and action cinema and that he can at that time. And this was a pleasure to talk about this one. And Lance, thank you so very much for your time and coming down the nostalgia road with me on Blind Fury.
Anytime, man, you just let me know. I love that you're focusing on oddball cult classics. That brings me so much joy, my friend. So rock and roll, and I'll be back anytime you need me.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.